On this episode, it is part 2 of the Envious or Near Vertical Incident Skywave propagation discussion. This is the Field Radio Podcast. I'm your host, John Jacobs, W7DBO, Whiskey 7, Delta Bravo Oscar. Thank you for clicking and tuning in and joining us on this podcast. In the way of news, our friend Stuart Thomas, KB1HQS and guest of the show, released his book, Portable Operating for Amateur Radio. This is for sure going to be a great resource for field operations. The book covers types of portable operating, organizing and carrying your equipment, radios for portable operating, power sources, portable antennas, propagation and spotting, on-the-air activities, accessories and tools, logging contact, and online resources. The book is available on the ARRL website and Amazon. I have linked it in the show notes. Stay tuned to our Hamvention coverage in 2 weeks where I'm going to catch up with Stuart there and talk to him about his book. Speaking of Hamvention, it is right around the corner, and our next episode will be the nightly recaps with interviews and event coverage. I've been busy getting gear ready for the event, and this last week I passed my FAA remote pilot certification, so the drone is going in the carry-on, and it'll be a fun addition to the videos releasing from Hamvention in Xenia, Ohio. Be sure you are following my Twitter feed at Field Radio Pod and my Facebook at Field Radio Podcast. Also, George and Jeremy of the Ham Radio Workbench will have a DMR hotspot set up on talk group 31075. I'll be monitoring that frequency as much as I can, so drop in and say hi to the gang. If you do not have DMR set up, you can always listen over the web on the Brandmeister hose line. The link to that website is in the show notes. If you plan on attending the Hamvention, please keep an eye out for me and come say hi. I'll be moving about with a camera and a tripod and a bunch of production gear, so not too hard to miss. Last year was my first year, and I was quite inexperienced to be able to get hands-on with all the gear you see in the magazines. This year, they are doing a showcase of MCOM vehicles. Like I did in Hamcation, I plan to get some good coverage of the vehicles there. So if your club is interested in building a portable MCOM vehicle or trailer, keep an eye out for that coverage. Of course, my favorite topic of Hamvention is the food selection. I'm pretty sure I'll be eating 3 or 4 courses a day of the world-famous pork chop sandwich that was so good last year. One other item of news is our friends at HamStudy have released their HamStudy app for iPhone and Android devices. The app is a great interface and includes some new study and cram features. HamStudy is a great resource if you are looking to upgrade or have a friend that is looking to get licensed. The website version is free and the app version is $3.99. The small cost of the app gives you additional features, including going offline with the question pool. The algorithm used is the secret sauce to take you past just practice tests and actually study and learn. Each question has a crowdsourced answer to help you understand the question and the concept being taught. Richard Bateman, KD7 BBC, will have a booth at Hamvention with HamStudy, so even though he lives only a few miles away from me, I will catch up with him there in Ohio and talk more about HamStudy and their new app. My oldest son, Keaton, who is 8 years old, has been using the app to get ready to take the technician exam. He was excited to come on the podcast and talk about his studying for the exam. So I have Keaton here with me. Welcome back to the show, Keaton.
Hi.
So you were on our solar eclipse episode a while back, and also you were on our Field Day episode where we were operating Field Day. Are you excited for Field Day this year?
Yep.
How do you like operating on Field Day? Do you like the computer mode or talking on the radio?
Computer.
You like the computer better? You were doing pretty good on the phone, though, on the radio.
Yeah.
Yeah, people seem to really want to talk to you.
Yeah.
So after Field Day, you talked to me and you said you wanted to get your license, and then we got kind of busy with summer, and then school started. So you've decided to start studying for your technician exam.
Yeah.
So as part of your nightly reading homework for school,
Yeah.
you have been using the HamStudy website,
Yeah.
and now you've started using their app that just released.
Yeah.
So what do you think about that? How's that working out for you?
Good.
Good. Anything more?
Mm,
Just good?
yeah.
Yeah. So how many questions have you gone through so far, do you think?
About 45.
45 questions. That's pretty good. So we have the app open here, so I thought it'd be a fun game for a minute here to go through some of the questions with you and see how you do live on the air.
Okay.
Okay, so read you your first question up on the app here.
Who may select a desired call sign under the Vanti call sign rules?
And what are the options?
Only an amateur license who has been licensed continuously for more than 10 years. B, any licensed amateur. C, only licensed amateurs with an extra class license. D, only licensed amateurs with general or extra class licenses.
Okay, so what do you think the answer is?
B.
B? That's my guess too. Hey, what does it say?
Correct.
Okay, so hit the explain button up there and go ahead and read the explanation that somebody submitted on that.
Any entry-level technician class license can select a Vanti call sign, but there are no more restrictions on what call signs a technician can choose compared to what an extra class can choose. You can submit an application for a Vanti call sign just as soon as your license appears in the FCC database.
So that means once you get your call sign, you can pick which call sign. So if you want to use my old call sign, KC7WVP, you can apply for that. You want to try one more?
Yep.
Okay, let's read one more before you go.
Which of the following is the purpose of the Amateur Radio Service Rules and Regulations as defined by the FCC? A, all these choices are correct. B, enhancing international goodwill. C, training of operators in military radio operating procedures. Providing inexpensive communication for local emergency organizations.
So which one do you think is correct?
B.
All right, let's see. Oh, you got it right.
Yep.
So let's see hit the explanation.
Just to memorize the Part 97 purposes for the amateur radio service, you'll remember enhancing international goodwill as one of the choices. Amateur radio is not meant to provide inexpensive communications. There's nothing in Part 97 about. Amateur radio operators involve efficient radio operating procedures. They might still sound like military radio procedures because of the ITU, phonetic alphabet often used to clarify messages, but that's not the purpose of amateur radio.
Okay, so let's see. Looking at the app, go back to your graph on how you're doing in the different areas. So how does that look? So you've seen 25% of the questions, and you have a 12% aptitude. So that's good because you're just learning. Every time you take a question, you read the explanation, and that's how you're learning for the test, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah. So how do you think you'll do on the test here in a little bit? When do you think you're going to be ready to take the test?
When I get like 50% of the questions completed.
So you think when you get a little farther down the road?
Yeah.
So this graph will tell you, that's another nice thing about this app, is this graph will tell you the areas when you get above 50% aptitude. And then if you start climbing, you can see, so the yellow bar is the questions you've seen, and the blue is the ones you've got right. And so all you have to do is just get a little bit higher on all of them and see more questions. And as you practice more, it's going to start showing you questions you got right and then questions you got wrong, and it'll mix it up for you.
Okay.
Cool, huh?
Yeah.
Okay, say goodbye to everybody.
Bye.
The topic of this episode is part 2 of NVIS. Out of all the episodes I have done, this one got the most response on giving more information. My goal of the last episode was to give a high-level overview of NVIS and how to get started. I purposely avoided the weeds of the topic and deeper technicalities as not to discourage a person looking to get started. So this follow-up episode will take a deeper dive into the topic. KK5JY pointed out that in our current solar sunspot cycle in minimum, that 40 meter during the daytime is not usable, and that 80 meter during the day and 160 meter at night is advisable during this minimum part of the cycle. A big caveat to any conversation is always going to be the band conditions. In my experience, I have been able to use recently 4 meter in digital modes and phone during the day. It is always going to be based on band conditions. As the noise floor rises, digital modes help overcome this issue. Looking at the practicality of 160 meter for MCOM is going to be a bit hard to overcome, just in setup and operating power required. So in this part 2, we will take a deeper dive looking at finding the right frequency and understanding the science behind it. A friend of the show and former guest, Greg Lane, and for KGL, gave me some feedback also on his experience on making hit and miss contacts on 40 meter and his setup. He did mention he utilizes NVIS for some of his contacts. He gave me some great information on being able to see what your F2 layer is at the time of making a contact, so after the fact, you can go back and learn what the layer was doing at the time of your contact. Also, Greg has some videos on his channel on his setup that helps show his NVIS antenna in action. I will put the message he sent with his links and videos in the show notes, so be sure to check that out for additional information. Thank you N4KGL for adding to the conversation on NVIS. So the basis for this episode will be excerpts that Chris Horner provided me. Chris is a 30-year veteran in military communications that NVIS is their bread and butter for communications. He shared with me a PDF of 18 different articles published in the Army Communicator magazine in the 80s and 90s. The articles were combined into a book titled Near Vertical Incident Skywave Communication, Theory, Technique, and Validation, published by World Radio Books. I will put a link to this PDF document in the show notes. So for this episode, I will read some highlights from some of these articles in a book-on-tape format. If you wish to read more, you can access the files at fieldradiopodcast.org under episode 21. The first area I'd like to cover is getting a better definition on different paths of radio waves and how they interact with the environment and the ionosphere. In the article Beyond Line of Sight Propagation Modes and Antennas, the authors identify several different modes. The first mode is direct wave mode. This is defined as the component of a wavefront that travels directly via line of sight from the transmitting antenna to the receiving antenna. This mode over ground, the range is affected by terrain absorption and path blockage caused by terrain features. The second mode is ground reflected wave mode. This mode is defined as the component of the radiated wave that reaches the receiver after being reflected from the ground. Since the ground reflected wave travels longer distance, it arrives at the receive antenna later than the direct wave, and it can cancel or enhance the direct energy waves depending on the geometry. This mode can be helpful if the direct wave is blocked. However, most of the time it is undesirable since it weakens the direct wave signal. The third mode is space wave mode. This is defined as the combination of the direct and ground reflected waves. To accomplish this, stations would need to be placed strategically on hilltops to take advantage of direct and ground waves for short-range line-of-sight communications. The fourth mode is surface wave mode. This is defined as the component of the ground wave that travels along the Earth's surface and is primarily affected by the conductivity and/or the dielectric constant of the Earth. When transmitting and receiving antennas are located close to the Earth, the direct and ground reflected waves tend to cancel each other. In this case, the resulting composite signal is principally that of the surface wave. The surface wave diminishes in strength with height above the ground, and it is usually not usable above one wavelength over the ground. The fifth mode is ground wave mode. This mode is defined as the vector sum of the space wave and the surface wave. Under ideal conditions, useful ground wave energy can extend up to 50 miles in range, which is well beyond line of sight. However, there are much more common conditions which limit useful ground wave propagation. The sixth mode is what we are more used to hearing, which is sky wave mode. Skywave is defined as those types of radio transmissions that make use of the ionosphere reflection. Skywave modes can provide communication over long distances that can't be achieved via ground wave. Which brings us to the NVIS concept. The main difference between short-range NVIS mode and the standard long-range Skywave HF mode is the lower frequency required to avoid penetrating the ionosphere at the near vertical angle of incidence of the signal up in the ionosphere. In order to attain NVIS effect, the energy must be radiated strongly enough at the angles greater than 75 to 85 degrees from the horizontal on a frequency that the ionosphere will reflect at the location and time. Any ground wave present with the NVIS skywave will result in undesirable wave interference effect if the amplitudes are comparable. However, proper antenna selection will reduce ground wave radiated energy to a minimum, and this will reduce the fading problems. Several of the articles discuss the advantages and disadvantages of different types of antennas deployed for NVIS propagation. This could be a whole episode in itself given the variety of configurations that are used to establish successful communications. In the last episode, I just covered the dipole configuration. In the articles, they also discuss the whip and the slant wire. A common perception when viewing HF antennas on military vehicles is they are bent forward over the vehicle for NVIS communication, when in actuality they are bent forward for transport or while moving to prevent breaking the antenna. Dr. Alan Christensen, in the article The HF NVIS Radio Path, did do some modeling of the antenna in this bent forward configuration. This position was found to be inefficient at NVIS. However, with the antenna deployed out horizontally away from the vehicle, they did find an advantage to NVIS as long as the mount had some configuration to tilt, putting the base of the antenna at a 45-degree angle and not the typical 90-degree angle you would see on the vehicle. Several dipole methods are discussed, including a fan horizontal dipole with the low-frequency wire on top, medium-frequency wire in the middle, and a high-frequency wire on the bottom with spacing 12 inches apart. The entire dipole sits between 20 to 40 feet off the ground. Another idea researched was the jumper multi-frequency doublet with insulators and jumpers at the high, medium, and low frequency points. This idea may play well into the new linked dipole coming out from PAC-10 of this year. A few more configurations. One is the terminated 2-wire folded dipole configured as an inclined antenna. The dipole is folded over, then terminated in the center on the top of the fold. The whole system is inclined with one side high and the other side low. The last configuration is the full wave loop antenna. This setup is what I have with my Chameleon Skywave antenna that is a full-length 160-meter loop antenna. This one may be practical to experiment with NVIS at 160 meters at night and 80 meters during the day while camping this summer. The PDF document goes into greater details in several articles, so check those out if you want to see some research behind the different configurations. The last article I want to cover is the NVIS propagation at low solar flux indices by Ed Farmer. This article is of particular interest given our solar minimum right now. The active area of NVIS propagation depends on the transmitting and receiving antennas, the operating frequency, and the condition of the ionosphere. The condition of the ionosphere depends on the time of day, the time of year, the solar activity cycle, and various transient conditions. In the ionosphere, the more ionized region, the better reflects radio waves. Less ionized or lower regions absorb radio waves. Lower frequency radio waves are more susceptible to absorption than higher frequencies. It is productive to think of the ionosphere in terms of layers. The lowest layer, the D layer, exists only during daylight hours. It will not reflect medium or high frequency waves. It weakens them by absorption. D-layer absorption is always a factor in medium and high-frequency daylight propagation. The E layer exists above the D layer, and its height varies between daylight and dark. It is a factor in medium and high-frequency propagation because it can reflect radio waves of sufficiently low frequency. It also attenuates signals that pass through to the F layers. Occasionally, regions of the E layer will contain cloud-like areas of high ionization. These regions will reflect signals that would normally pass through. Since this effect does not occur with predictable regularity, and it is localized, it is called sporadic E. The F layer is actually 2 layers during the day and 1 layer at night. The F1 layer exists only during daylight. The F2 layer during the day is a distinct layer. At night, the F1 and F2 layers merge into a single F layer. The F2 layer is the principal reflecting region for high-frequency communication. At the peak of the solar cycle, there is a very high flux, and the ionosphere receives a great deal of excitation. This contributes to its ability to efficiently reflect radio signals. The frequency required to penetrate the ionosphere increases. Absorption in the lower layers also increases, but on balance, higher solar flux is beneficial. The highest critical frequency that when radiated directly upward will reflect from the ionosphere is called the critical frequency. Signals above that frequency pass through the ionosphere and out into space. Critical frequency depends on the condition of the ionosphere, not on any particular communication objective, power level, antenna, or equipment. It is useful to review the various frequency used to characterize ionosphere propagation. FO critical frequency, the highest frequency that will not penetrate into the ionosphere, is more than 50% of the time when radiated is directed at a takeoff angle of 90 degrees. Critical frequency does not assume any specific communication objective. Highest probable frequency, HPF, the highest frequency at which ionosphere propagation between specific locations will be available 10% of the time. Maximum usable frequency, MUF, is the highest frequency at which ionosphere propagation between specific locations will be available 50% of the time. Frequency of optimum traffic, FOT, is the highest frequency at which the ionosphere propagation between specific locations will be available 90% of the time. Lowest usable frequency, LUF, the lowest frequency at which the ionosphere propagation between specific locations and using specific power levels, receiving equipment, and antennas will be available 50% of the time. The LUF, or lowest usable frequency, can be lowered by increasing power, using higher gain antennas, or substituting higher performance receiving equipment. In lower sunspot cycles, the 160-meter band will be useful for all paths at night. This, however, is not as good as it sounds. The LUF for a given communication system and objective can be quite high. Ionosphere absorption is a larger factor at the medium frequencies, MF, than at high frequency. It is also harder to radiate a strong signal on this band than it is on those of shorter wavelengths. It is, however, the only way to make NVIS propagation usable. It is important that tactical and emergency communications develop strategies for implementing medium frequency 160-meter NVIS paths. There are several challenges. The most important ones are equipment and antennas. Full-size resonant antennas for 160 meters are physically large. At a half-wave dipole cut for 1.9 megahertz would be about 246 feet long. To meet the usual NVIS height objective of 0.1 to 0.25 wavelengths, it would have to be mounted 49 to 123 feet above the ground. Antennas of this size and mounted at these heights are uncommon, are difficult to erect, and are susceptible to damage during emergency conditions. Many reduced size antennas exhibit lower radiation resistance. Consequently, resistive losses must be minimized or efficiency will suffer. Noise is more of a problem at medium frequency. Atmospheric noise is of higher intensity than at HF, and man-made noise is more common. These combine to raise the noise floor. Because of these problems, low antenna gain, low antenna efficiency, higher path losses, and higher noise floor, MF paths will require significantly more power than one used for HF operation might estimate. For the training item, I got an email from Jess Lang asking about how to organize a family communication plan and also best practices on organizing channels on your radio. In the last episode, I covered the family communication plan. This episode, I will cover some best practices I have found on organizing the channel programming of your radios. If you have a topic or question you would like to see covered on the show or a training item, drop me a line at john, John, at fieldradiopodcast.org. Hello, this is John W7DBO with the training item. This training item is organizing the memory channels on your radio. More modern radios are gaining larger and larger capability to program in channels in your radio. My old Kenwood from the 90s featured a total of 80 channels, and you had to determine the split between VHF and UHF before programming. Now my new Kenwood has the option of 1,000 memory channels and also creating groups. So the following is the best practice I have found in organizing your memory channels. First, you need to look at the capability of all of your devices. You will want to have the same memory numbers across all of your radios. That way, when you are on channel 15 on your mobile, it is the same as being on channel 15 on your HT. This keeps you from having to remember different numbering systems across your radios. In order to make this happen, you first have to identify the radio that you own that has the least capability. This may be the radio that only has 128 channels. If you program the memory in all of your radios to the 128 memory channel limit, then you will know the channels can be the same across all of your devices. Some radios like my Kenwood have radio groups. However, not all my radios have groups, so I do not use this feature. If all of your radios have groups, this is a great way to separate channels based on your operating modes. However, you can still do it in an informal grouping of frequencies on any radio, which is what I have done with mine. My first group is my top 10 frequencies. These are my local popular repeaters, nets I check into, and our family Simplex frequency. These are my most used frequencies, and I find myself sticking to the top 10 most of the time. The second group is a random collection of frequencies I use only some of the time, mostly while traveling, or at less popular local repeaters I can QSY to if the main ones are busy. My third group is Simplex frequencies, either national or local, both on 2 meter and 70 centimeter. The national frequencies are essential, but the local ones are very important to have programmed in. So you can use a Simplex around camp or car to car, knowing that you are using a legitimate frequency and not walking on something like a linked system. Check with your local frequency coordinator for a list of these frequencies. My fourth frequency group is a collection of Aries or MCOM groups I check into. Each frequency is first programmed in with the repeater, then the same frequency as Simplex. This helps for Simplex nights and being able to switch to Simplex then back to the repeater. I then have all the alternative frequencies for those groups since they will have multiple for other types of nets or backup frequencies. My fifth group is several groupings for intertie or linked repeater systems. Here in the Mountain West, we have an intertie system that is a set of repeaters linking from Idaho down through Utah to Nevada and Arizona. I have all of these frequencies entered in geographically north to south. We also have another system called the Sinbad network. This is all entered in geographically north to south in a group. My sixth group is my digital mode group. This is where I have my APRS and other frequencies set aside for digital mode traffic. My seventh group is for satellite operations. This will take up quite a few frequencies for the birds since I will need to record in splits between uplink and downlink and Doppler effect shift on the uplink. Each bird is entered in multiple times to shift as the frequency changes. My next to last group are frequencies put into memory that I will monitor. This includes the NOAA weather channels, select GMRS, MURS frequencies, local airport frequencies, and public safety channels. Once again, these are monitor only, and I have transmit inhibit selected in programming for radios that could transmit in that range. My last group is for special event support. Even though the frequencies may already be stored in memory elsewhere, I keep the sequence of frequencies used in a collection so I'm not jumping around my memory program to find the right frequency. For Lajota bike event, this is important because in the course of the day you will QSY across several nets and frequencies as you move through the 200-mile course. It is important to have all event frequencies entered in even if you do not think they will apply to your assignment during the event. You may get a last-minute reassignment or be asked to relay a message to another net. You will need all nets and frequencies programmed into your memory to not be limited the day of the event. After the event, I wipe these frequencies and put in the next event. This is mostly to save on space of memory of frequencies. Also, since this list may vary, I keep this at the top of the list so it can grow or shrink as needed. I hope you have found this grouping of frequencies helpful. These are my best practices that I do for my gear. There may be some other grouping that makes more sense for your operating preference. The key is to have organization and the same programming across all of your radios so the channel selection becomes second nature as you transition through radios. This is John, W7DBO, with a training item. This will do it for this episode. Thank you for listening. As always, please send me your comments, feedback, and show ideas to john@fieldradiopodcast.org. Next time we speak, it'll be at Hamvention in Xenia, Ohio. So until next time, 73.